Good morning everybody and welcome back to another video where today we're diving straight back into the minifigure scale Breath of the Wild Hyrule Castle project, where this is the most exciting update we have had in years. This project has been going on since 2019, I believe, obviously only been showing it on YouTube since 2022, but today, after many years of work, we can indeed mark the fact that the ground floor is done, and today we're going to be celebrating that by taking a look and of course showing you the front gates, which is a build I'm very proud of, and also sort of the first iconic structure to take place. And then of course after today I'll be moving on to the library very excitingly and putting that together to continue our progress and the tentative goal of potentially finishing the second year by the end of 2025. And just as a reminder, this castle is made up of 4 layers, all different sections, and there are all the rooms on the inside. It is a pre-calamity version of the castle, hence things are looking pretty green, but we've got the west passage and the east passage and the docks, and I mentioned the library. And today we're going to take a look at the front gate as well as just go over the whole of the exterior because it looks so much different. And while I'll be honest, putting the final touches and then adding this model to the front here with the doors was a really big moment. It was kind of underwhelming in the moment, which I don't know, feels a bit weird, but I'll talk more about that at the end. So let's take a look at it in situ. Obviously this joins the back side up with the front side at the entrance to the castle, with fitting place for us to end our journey, and also symbolic because we had previously started, before I knew about the scale, way back. The first video in this playlist is actually the video of me doing the bridge, which turned out to be pretty much the right scale, shockingly, just not quite wide enough for what we needed in the end. But again, we'll come back to that. Off to the left, you'll see that these surfaces have been given a brand new layer of detail. Previously they were blank, and this is obviously over the west passage. Now, because the west passage is a mining operation full of tracks and extracting minerals, you can see that like down here on the docks, we have set up a sort of a port or an export situation for these things coming out the mine. The other side of the mine, of course, links to the main castle, so some stuff can leave by wagon from front gates, but we've set up a little raft here, which I featured in another one of our custom sets, including a variety of crates and diamonds and so on, and all these containers that have rock salt in them, just to fill up these dock areas. And these ones I chose not to add grass to because they're so close down to the water that you can imagine either with tide or in rain, things would be pretty muddy and slippy, and so we kept them plain in there. And I really like having this raft here. I think it adds a bit, and of course you've still got the waterfalls in behind it, but that's not new. Stacked up above these crates, we have the second small level here, which features a little crane on it, which is also pretty cool. This one is a little weird in how it's been brick built and put together, but in the end I'm happy with it. It's just using Pythagoras' triangles and a variety of different plates to create sort of a lattice frame sort of setup. Although it gets a bit messy at the end because angles and studio. I think I could do a better job in real life, but I didn't want it to be like this big imposing one because I didn't think they would have like highly mechanized cranes. Instead, this is just sort of a simple gantry that if they need to lift stuff up or onto boats or get it up of the west passage and onto this section above full of grass, they can do. And again, there's some more crates up here perhaps waiting to be used by the crane, which would have string on it, but you know, studio and string, there was no point in me adding that in. That's what the clips along the top are for. I like it. It's a little bit out of place, but it'll do for now, and we can always change it later. Up on the ground above, we actually have another small section of grass. This one widens out into a more important area in a second, but down here it's just overgrown, using the normal culprits for our foliage styles, mostly the 3-prong leaf, the leaf stuck inside it, the new fern element, and then we've got the pine trees, bringing these back from the west side and the archery range, and then making some smaller versions here using bar pieces and plant pieces upside down to create smaller fir trees as if they are still growing. But after this opens up into a bit of a bigger space where we have the first battery of cannons, which is a brand new inclusion for us in this model. They are all here on swivel turny tables, and you can see that 2 of them have been lit or have a sort of standby flame ready to be shot out, and these cannons can be angled to defend the wide front side. Now, if we think about it in a military context, of course it makes no sense that there are cannons here and nowhere else, apart from another battery I'll show you, but there'll be more further up, and really this is a detail taken from Akala Citadel, and just it's assumable that the castle would indeed have cannons. To match the aesthetic here, they've left a bit of an open gap behind it because of course these cannons would have like large recoil on them, meaning we need some space for our operators to move. So all the grass has been trodden down flat. You can see some leaves among where it's grown a bit more weedy around the actual cannons itself, and then behind them is a row of flowers up against the cliff, and also this big barrel which is supposed to represent sort of a brazier, but more of a simple militaristic one, not very ornate ornate, but it's just somewhere to keep a running fire going while you're operating the cannons. Obviously in the rain this would be a problem, but it's just a method to make sure there's always fire to launch off the cannons. And yeah, it's a bit weird that they're only defending the west side, but it will be whatever it will be. Over to the further left, we brought back the apple trees and the pine trees, and those are both sort of filling up this woodland here. But just behind we have a little tent, which is holding a fire, so in a waterproof version of the fire. And then right at the back we have this little container here, which is a little sort of lean-to for all of the cannonballs. And they are stored close by, but a little distance away. And then, of course, you've just got more foliage off here. These are the apple trees I mentioned, and this is the area right above the sort of roller coaster track, comes out from underneath the West Passage. And I do try and base these areas off stuff if we can find it in game, in a sense, so try and make them as relevant and realistic as possible. But in a lot of these they are just blank and dead nowadays. Sometimes there's a tree crops on them in Breath of the Wild, but again they're all sort of blackened. So I like bringing the life back and trying to counteract all the grey we have in this model. Up above then, that brings us to which actually a floor 2 plate, and this one's slightly unfinished. And while we've done all the texturing on the wall, which was something I told you guys I was going to do in a previous episode, and I have started the rock wall behind it, this one can't quite be finished until we deal with the first gatehouse, but it is complete enough for now, so it is marked as complete. You can see that there's a second battery of cannons here, and this is also another big empty space. And I talked about this way back in when we were talking about the archery range, which is actually just down this slope here, and this bit's been complete and is above the lockup, hence the giant hole that passes down into the Staunox room, that I wanted to have a more sort of military training exercises up here. So not only have you got the cannons for active duty, and you'll notice there's another big brazier here, but we've got this big ring, and you could see this is a sumo ring, perhaps playing too much to Twilight Princess, but I see it as a sparring setup. So you can train with archery on the lower platform, or you can come up here to fight with swords and spears and train as soldiers. So this is a training ground. Once again, the trees have all continued around. You see I've continued the birch trees across, the pine trees across, and the fir trees, and all three of these mixed together to make sure that this area is cohesive. Once again, reminding you that while we do have like 6 or 7 tree species across the castle, these are all the species we're going to have, so that we can create sort of middle micro ecosystems and keep a nice flow to it. So that's why you see the same trees pop up all over the castle, but specifically while certain groups cluster together, which now makes sense why I did the pine trees right on the front. Some of the details here include benches for people to watch the sparring ring, a nice flat area, some flags, of course some weapon racks, and then some water either for you to like dust your hands off, or maybe you just need a sort of a drink after all that hard work, and that's here with a dark orange bucket. As I mentioned, this wall segment has been built for years at this point, but has not been textured, and because this was the sort of big finale for this ground floor, I say that like I'm advertising like that, but I'm not. It's just the big conclusion of getting this part finished. I wanted to make sure that everything was done, so that's why we've decorated these side pieces, and of course why this wall is nice and textured now. Shame I couldn't finish the section behind it, but we'll get there eventually, and it will all come to fruition. I'm really loving these low down angles. You've been seeing them throughout the video, but these ones at minifigure height, because now that the model is getting quite tall, you actually looks like you're in the world, and you can't see any sort of interior shots here. Yes, you can sort of see that the rock stops a little short at the top of this image, but I do love how low to the ground the cannons are, and how sort of real and deep it feels. And it's messy, but it's real and it's gritty. I love Studio's rendering engine, it's powerful. Taking us back to the front gate then, and this time moving to the other side. Behind the gate, obviously the main path continues upwards. We're actually going to have to make a sort of alteration here, because this is the main path. It's the first time we've actually reached the sort of main castle track as we've gone through the castle, and I've accidentally done it in grass. What needs to happen is I need to take out the middle of this path and actually put in a sort of tiled pattern here, which I think I'm just going to do with 1x2 tiles, the same as we've done on a lot of the interiors, and just sort of stack them and overlap them as we go up. So it's going to be a bit of a pain to come back and redo that, but it's just something I didn't think of until actually these renders were already finished. But it is something that is important that needs to be dealt with, so I will do that. But excluding the main path, there is this track that winds down the outside to the right, and taking inspiration from this one shot of the castle we have in Age of Calamity, I've actually decided to put a wagon here. We've got 3 more of the fir trees, as well as a little sapling and some leaves and some rocks, and then just a wagon for supplies, which yes is blocking the whole path, but doesn't really matter. You can imagine it's actually perhaps in motion coming up and down. There's also some barrels around here, and this wagon is highly simplified, highly small. I didn't want it to take up too much space. I'd probably do a better job in real life, I'll be honest, but because of studio and angles, I just chose to do a simplest one for now. And you see that in most shots it looks good. I think it's only because I'm pointing it out now that some of you might go, hey, that's a little bit janky. But anyway, this thin path continues round. It's a bit overgrown, it's a bit wild, which I kind of like. Perhaps obviously not very well trodden, although you'll see that people do go down here in just a second. And then you pass a couple more saplings as you round the corner, down to where we were last time we did a video on this castle, which was this swampy area. But right in between is this new area. And I do want to point out, this new grass slope was a pain. This took hours, probably about 10 hours total, to get all the slopes supported and the angle just right, and for it to curve up to the right height, and then to do all the rock work behind it as well. A really, really long process, but it did result in this really nice effect. And of course here, where it comes out to a flat, it creates a lovely staging ground for a camp setup, which is what we've got here, where you can see 3 tents. And the idea behind this is obviously the sort of normal castle reserves have barracks inside the castle, but when you have visiting troops, either from other kingdoms or retainers, or perhaps more mercenary styles, or just training again, you need a place for these castle people to keep and stay, and that is what they're doing here with this small setup. 3 tents here, mostly making use of 6x6 white tiles, although the one at the back here is actually using 2x6s because the model actually has to split in 2 because it's on actually 2 plates. So this tent has easy access when you tear the model apart, and you can see that there are actually sleeping bags inside in a variety of muted colours and dark red and yellow sticking out there, and they've all got a corner turned back. There's also crates of supplies, mostly empty, but this is obviously a cooking setup. So one of the tents actually has a little cooking pot in it. There's a spear in a can over here. There's some pots all around the table and some fish being ready to be dissected up, perhaps some Hylian bass, and of course these are actually being caught on some fishing lines which are going in here. And I love this little detail, it's very lived in. So we've got some set up to catch the fish that are then being cooked. I always love storytelling, and I really like how this camp turned out, and it's a nice bright spot that has a big story to it. And then of course it just continues around fairly plain into the swampy area, which we took a look at last week, but we are just going to sweep on past it to take a look at a new wall section which has been textured. In the last video I built this area here and I didn't finish texturing this wall, so that has been done now. As you can see, it is the same as all the other walls. It blends perfectly in with that unique dark brown tree towards the end here and that curve, but we have also added all the foliage around specifically this tower section here, actually using the foliage that I designed for the medieval town square remock that we did recently, because I thought it was so perfect and fantastical. Even in that one I mentioned it was fantastical. So although it doesn't reference any Breath of the Wild flowers, I brought them in here as sort of a more taller overgrown section alongside the similar bushes that we've had before, and some of the weeds and yellow flowers to actually tie in with the swamp area down below, because again, species drift even if the habitat isn't exactly the same. This wall doesn't actually have an entrance point to it, however, just to use the space behind it, you can actually see that we have some straw bale dummies as well as some weapon racks behind here. Just some very simple ones, kind of remind me of Pierre from Ocarina, but I just like to use space, although I really don't know how anyone gets down here to defend this wall. I guess you have to do some rock climbing. Or actually, I know how you do it. You jump over the gap with the lightning tree from the apple section, which is by the East Passage. It will all make sense, and we'll see it one day, maybe when it's in real life, if we ever get there. But let's come back to the highlight of today now, which of course is that front gatehouse. I was so looking forward to doing this, and it really was a fitting end to the ground floor. And of course, it really does tie it together, and it has such a presence that I really love. Of course, it's on the bridge, which, as I mentioned, was actually the bridge that we originally built, just heavily modified. I basically had to redo it from scratch, but it is the same design that I featured in the original video. And underneath, it has a brand new selection of rock work. Don't worry, the Korok gap is still here as well on these alcoves, which are all faithfully recreated, and down the bottom we have all these bones and little rock clouds, which I really like. And I love how the blue water finally feels complete around the whole model too. But of course, the more interesting part is sort of the slope up, inspired by the Disney castle, but also just to get us to the right height in a nice way, which brings us to these grand doors. And I knew for a fact I wanted to try and brick build the details, which means yes, they're slightly lacking in many accurate details, but I didn't want to use stickers for this. So instead here we've got a brick built version of the loft wing crest, and then these bars to represent some of the stronger rivets. And once again, it's all about getting the iconic shapes and blocking done rather than absolutely every iconic detail, because even though this model is huge, it is still scaled down. And the same goes for the rock work around the outside. I tried to recreate as many of these sort of lines and heavy work. You can see 2 rail plate lines coming out by the sides of the wall. You can see dark bluish grey being used to represent sort of T-lines and indents and stuff around the arrow slits as well. And actually, it's quite funny because this castle wall segment is arguably the same shade as the rockwork, but obviously that would not contrast very well with our model, so it has to be light bluish grey. And I understand that's not accurate, but it is a compromise, and obviously the lighting in Hyrule Castle is weird anyway. So to be honest, I'm fine with settling for light bluish grey here. But what's interesting is the walls have no accents, they have no depth and texture. However, I've chosen to use dark bluish grey to highlight some of the extruding or extra details on the model from game in order to, well, add visual interest, but also to make them stand out more. And I think that's really, really important, and actually reminds me of sort of the light work they did to make the lava glow in Barad-dûr. And I think it's crucial that we have a little bit of variety in here. So those splotches of dark bluish grey I'm very keen of. As far as interesting techniques, we've got the newer bow styles to recreate the Gothic arches at the top, as well as these sausages to mimic the curving that happens up there. We're using these same sort of crenellation pieces around the two side towers, and I'm actually really particularly quite pleased with sort of the towers up the top as well, like the dark blue sections. And that is because of all the snot work that went into creating the mini arches up here, and then the bracket work to sort of recreate the definition around them as well, which I'm really pleased with. Up top, of course, there's space for figures to stand, and of course the doors do open. Another one of my favorite details is actually here on the floor, and this is actually going to blend into the path when I do it, like I was talking about earlier. But we have the sort of markings that the wheels that the doors are on in game actually roll on, and I really love the bit of dark tan in there to recreate the patterning. I just think that looks really, really great, and I can't wait to continue that upwards. Of course, at the bottom around each side, we have all of this sort of raised out, these buttresses for the corners to sit on, and it does perch on the rock fairly well as well. And of course, the doors do indeed open 90 degrees, which was a must. I'm really pleased with that. Yeah, I love how this looks. It took quite a while, but I think it was well worth the effort, and it came out well. And of course, we've got the 4 banners on the front, because as I mentioned earlier, this is a pre-calamity castle. But yeah, this is where we're at. This is where we've got to go. Lots to see and lots to do, but it's definitely looking more complete. I think the second layer is going to be a weird one because it doesn't encroach inwards very much. So for context, the second layer ends at the first gatehouse, meaning that most of the second layer is just straight up rockwork. Now there's almost all the interiors are on this second layer. Everything from the library to the guards' quarters and most of the observatory, the only exception really being the dining room. And also a lot of the Age of Calamity rooms that we're going to add are going to be on this second layer. So although it may just be up rockwork, it's going to be a lot of logistics and of course the most crucial internal planning to make sure that all the interior rooms do indeed work. But I'm up for the challenge. We've still got 9 months left in the year, and I'm hopeful that we can make a really sizable amount of progress on it this year to start moving things upwards, because then layer 3 is really the last big layer, and then layer 4 and then obviously the eventual upper floors are all just sanctum. So really, if we can get layer 2 done, we're technically 2/3 of the way to the sanctum, which would be amazing to say. And doing stuff like that front gate really gives me hope that it's going to be as amazing as I say. But I'm going to leave you now with a tease on the library, which is the area I'm working on next, and hopefully that video will be out in just a couple of months' time, if not less. And I'm motivated, I'm excited, I want to keep working on it, and I'm hoping you guys are enjoying the progress too. So apologies if this is a little rambly. Let me know if you guys want me to do an overview of the whole castle. So less talking about the new progress and the building techniques, but just showing you what we have so far, because I'd be happy to put that into the schedule as well. Do let me know though, and let me know what you think of that front gatehouse. I'm very, very happy with it, and I will see you guys again very, very soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.